now start with working session 1, accountability versus independence of judiciary. The chairperson of the first session is Advocate Gauri Shagni. May I request you to please take a seat? And may I also request Advocate Leopoldo Olvera Coutinho and Advocate Jain Pulgaonkar to please start the session 1.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Goa High Court Bar Association, as Secretary of the Association, I welcome one and all for this interactive session. Our Vice President, Sri Vishnu Prasad Lavande, has already given us a brief insight into the Judicial Accountability and Standards Act 2010. Before I also give a brief insight into the Act, let me briefly introduce speakers for this session. Towards my right is one of our senior lawyers at the High Court Bar, Advocate Leopoldo Coutinho, a very well-known figure in the courts in South Goa. In fact, we very often say he represents the South at the High Court at Panji here, in the face of the South. But he's equally well known in all other parts of Goa. And to my left, another very senior colleague at the High Court Bar, Advocate Jain Pulgaonkar, also having rich expertise in various fields of law. And both speakers have been contemporaries for a long period of time. And it's been a pleasure for me to watch them and evidence them argue matters at the High Court on different topics. So you have very good experienced speakers to address you on this issue, and I'm sure they will keep you entertained. As we all know, or rather to put it, this Act was introduced in the year 2010, but unfortunately it has not seen the light of the day for the last 3 years. Now this Act was, if you see the preamble of the Act, it deals with 3 parts: judicial accountability, judicial standards, and prosecution for offences committed by judges of the Supreme Court or High Court. So the Act is essentially in 3 parts. Now accountability is the most sensitive issue today. Today's newspapers coincide with our topic for discussion for the next 2 days. Today's headlines in all newspapers other than Tejpal, it referred to a judge who was accused of molesting a law graduate who was interning with him when he was the then judge of the Supreme Court of India. And surprisingly though, that judge is the chairman of a human rights authority in the state of Calcutta, and one of the very vociferous judges when it came to human rights, accountability, part of the 2G monitoring case. So how far are these judges accountable to the citizenry, and how far the word accountable is accountable? That's how I would say it. Judicial standards. Are they maintained? Are they deteriorating, as our Vice President put it some time back, that it is on the verge of erosion? And before it is completely eroded, this Act was intended to be passed. Do we call this the judicial will to see that the Act is not passed? Or there are other reasons? Last but not the least, the most important aspect is, we all know we have 3 parts of our democratic setup: the legislature, executive, and the judiciary. Our constitution provides for a certain procedure when it comes to testing the standards of a judge of the Supreme Court or the High Court. Whether this Act, which is going to be passed by the legislature, is it an infringement on this part of power of the Constitution, which requires a particular procedure for dealing with standards of judges? And therefore, whether this is an indirect interference in another wing of the democratic setup. With these three important aspects in mind, our first session for today, if we see the paper circulated, accountability versus independence of judiciary, a nicely formulated topic. Will the executive hold the judiciary accountable? Or will the judiciary itself hold its judicial brethren accountable? If not, then who should hold them accountable? That's how interesting this subject is. That is how this act is enacted or sought to be enacted. So with this few introductory words, I will throw the session open to our speakers, and each speaker will devote 20 minutes of his valuable time, and once both the speakers have concluded, there is an interactive session of 20 to 30 minutes where you can put forth your queries and your suggestions to the respectable panel members. I'm told it's lucky to start from the left-hand side. So I'll start with, I request our senior lawyer, Advocate Sri Jayant Pulgaonkar, to express his opinion on this topic of accountability versus independence of judiciary.
Vice President of the High Court Bar Association, Mr. Navalny, Assistant Minister Sahai, ladies and gentlemen. The subject of this session is accountability versus independence of judiciary. There seems to be a basic assumption. These are mutually incompatible. That if you are accountable, you are not independent. And if you are independent, for remaining independent, you do not have to be accountable at all. It is said that a legendary judge of great integrity said to have said very loftily that I am accountable to none for my decisions except my conscience. That's a very high sentiment, but perhaps not very consistent with our democratic setup or democratic setup everywhere. Every authority which wields power must be accountable to someone outside the authority. And there is no doubt that Indian judiciary, the Indian higher judiciary, the Supreme Court and the High Courts wield enormous power under our constitutional scheme. Under Article 226 of the Constitution, High Courts wield power that is perhaps unimaginable in any other country. And Supreme Court, of course, ultimately the final court of appeal under Article 136, and in breach of fundamental rights wielding exercise under 32, Article 32. And then the Constitution itself confers with the Supreme Court the power to make laws, in the sense, under Article 141 of the Constitution, the law declared by the Supreme Court becomes law of the land. That's a legislative power that is conferred on the Supreme Court. Therefore, the first is, of course, the question of independence of judiciary. There are diverse judicial opinions in the matter of accountability maybe. But one finds uniformly across the court, there is almost unanimity in judicial opinion that independence of judiciary is the basic feature of our constitution. And even while framing the constitution, the framers of the constitution were mindful of this fact. And provided sufficient safeguards in the constitutional scheme for ensuring that judiciary, particularly the higher judiciary, remains independent. Now, what are the requirements for independence of judiciary? One is the security of tenure of the judges. That judges will not be easily removed at the pleasure or displeasure of those in power. The second is that there's one aspect of this. Now, this was ensured by introducing Article 124 of the Constitution, in which it was provided that a judge appointed by the President of India, of course, formally, in consultation with such judges of the Supreme Court as he may think necessary, and with the mandatory provision that he shall always consult the Chief Justice of India, shall not be removed from office except one, when he attains the age of superannuation, which is the age of 65. Two, he by his own volition resigns his office. Three, or he is removed by a lengthy and complicated legislative process provided in sub-article 4 of Article 124, known as impeachment proceedings, which requires an address to be made by one House of Parliament, the majority of that House, and a very complicated process. Attempted, I think perhaps only twice, in case of Justice Ramaswamy, which was referred to earlier, and ultimately defeated by the ruling party's members abstaining from. Why it becomes ultimately a political issue. A judge who is otherwise undesirable for his continuation on office, because of political compulsions or political reasons, may be saved in this process. The second aspect of the matter, very important one, is this. In those early days, perhaps in those idealistic times, when we were just evolving our national experience, the framers thought of the independence without providing for accountability in the Constitution itself, because it was said that the cases where such proceedings would be required would be few and far between. It would not be necessary, and it should be. Only because somebody is accused or alleged, because the judges have to deliver justice, they give decisions, and very often they give decisions which are not liked by the government in power. So it should not be easily available to the government to remove it with a process which is not allowed. And that was the thinking. Now consider today, even one impeachment proceedings takes a considerable amount of parliamentary time. In today's atmosphere, and there are number of judges in the Supreme Court itself as have grown manifold. Number of high courts in the country have grown manifold. Number of high court judges in the country now running to perhaps I don't know what number. And then day in, day out, there are allegations. There are first the whispers, the murmurs, now loud public allegations about the misconduct of judges in the High Court. If assuming, if 10 of such judges were to face impeachment, the Parliament can do nothing but be seized of these impeachment proceedings. So, over the course of period, what has happened is that the impeachment proceedings today, impeaching a judge, one, because it becomes a matter of political tussle. Second, because it consumes so much of the parliamentary time that you cannot simply have impeachment proceedings. Which is why some other mechanism, some law has to take place, should be put in place for the removal of the judges. Now the same also applies to some extent to the appointment of judges. Now, there is a historical background to this. It is not as if that there was no tension between the executive and the legislature even in the early days. When, for instance, the High Court struck down many of the land reform bills. This was something that was seen as an obstacle in the way of implementing the social justice regulations, laws that the new government wanted to enact. But by and large, independence of judiciary was respected. Perhaps the first serious blow to independence of judiciary occurred sometime in 1973, when three senior-most judges of the High Court, Supreme Court, were superseded to appoint a judge who had given favorable judgments to the government of the day in the matters of bank nationalization or other matters. This was the first instance of supersession of judges. The rule always was that in the matter of appointment of chief justice, the seniority will be, rule of seniority will be respected. That was given a go by. That was the first blow. And then, as far as I recall, that concept of committed judiciary, a word I think coined by late Mr. Mohan Kumar Mangal, was then the Steel Minister in Mrs. Indira Gandhi's cabinet. An eminent lawyer, was also a committed Marxist himself. And he put forth this concept of committed judiciary. This was seen to be an assault on the independence of judiciary. This may have been the first major instance. But then, in subsequent years, in intervening years, there was an internal emergency declared. There was all sorts of judicial interference in judicial matters by the government. And of course, the Supreme Court may have touched its new law in the judgment of ADM Jabalpur, habeas corpus case. And then it was seen that judges were transferred at random. there was seen to be a political interference. And in the background of this, the petitions were filed in various high courts, where ultimately came before the Supreme Court. In what is called known as first judge's case, S.P. Gupta's case, reported in the year 1982 Supreme Court 146. The question was then, who has the primacy in the appointment of judges or in the matter of transfer of judges? Now if you read Article 124, it would appear that the President appoints. President has the mandate to have consultations with the Chief Justice of India. The consultation, of course, does not mean that he necessarily has to agree. And when the President decides, appoints, President acts on the advice of the Council of Ministers under Article 74, which is binding on it. So actually, the executive decides. The question was, who has the primacy? The views of the Chief Justice or the executive? And then, the majority judgment given in this first judge's case held that the primacy in the matter of appointment of judges would be interpreting Article 124 and 217 with the executive. The Chief Justice has to be consulted. There has to be consultation with other judges of the Supreme Court. But ultimately, the primacy would be of the Supreme Court, of the executive. Now, a decade long thereafter, sometime in 1993, the correctness of this judgment was doubted by a smaller bench. Matter was referred to what is called known as the second judge's case. In the second judge's case, the pendulum swung the other way. And before that happened, there was a proposal. In fact, when Mr. Dinesh Goswami was the law minister, he sought to introduce the 67th Amendment Bill for composing a commission consisting of the Chief Justice of India and two senior most judges of the Supreme Court, the matter of appointment of judges. Now that proposal came up for discussion at the Chief Justice's conference, and the Chief Justice's conference rejected the proposal. They in turn proposed a constitutional amendment to Articles 124, 127 and 222 of the Constitution. It would substitute the word consultation with the Chief Justice with concurrence of Chief Justice of India, given in consultation with such judges of the Supreme Court as it is necessary. That was the resolution passed by the Chief Justice's conference. Not much after the second judge's case came up for consideration. And interestingly, the majority judgment in the second judge's case, given by Justice J.S. Verma, was substantially on the lines of the resolution passed at the Chief Justice's conference. Namely that primacy, although there was no constitutional amendment, the Supreme Court ruled that primacy would now be given to the Chief Justice of India in consultation with two senior most judges of the Supreme Court. If effectively restructuring Articles 124 and 217 of the Constitution. Now, this has been received, belated, has been criticized after many years of working as rewriting of the Constitution by the judge. What they could not do by amendment, they do it with judicial pronouncement. But what they, in their wisdom, said that it was the spirit of the Constitution that judiciary must have primacy in the matter. Now, of course, in hindsight, this has been criticized, as I said, as rewriting of the Constitution. In fact, these are the words which Law Minister Mr. Kapil Sibal used in Rajya Sabha when he introduced the bill. That the judgment was that judges were rewriting the Constitution, the provision, something that was not there in the Constitution. But coming in the background of the wanton government interference, executive interference in the appointment of judges, what was seen to be the assault on the independence. Criticism, if any, on those times appears to have been muted. In fact, a couple of years back, on this very subject, we had under the auspices of Goa International Center, we had the privilege of hearing the senior advocate of the Supreme Court, Mr. Prashant Bhushan. He was very critical of this judgment, the second judge's case, as well as the proposed bill. And I remember a question was put to me, and if I recollect correctly, it was put by my fellow panelist, Mr. Kutino. He asked Mr. Bhushan, how was it that this judgment was not criticized in this manner when it was first pronounced? And Mr. Bhushan was candid enough to say that in the climate of that time, perhaps we thought that this was a much welcome judgment. This would prevent government interference. The judiciary itself, given primacy, these matters of undesirable appointments will not come about. And this is what Mr. Bhushan said. Now, it's always the laws are made, constitutional amendments made, they are the product of time, the climate of the day. And this judgment, I believe, was the climate, the product of what was happening at that particular time. Over the years, the judiciary being given not only primacy, but particularly, totally, the exclusive right to determine who will be appointed judges of the Supreme Court in the matter of transfer, all this, and rendering the executive practically voiceless in the matter. Unfortunately, the murmurs about unfortunate judicial appointments have not died down, they have increased. The experience has not been happy. And then there are rethinking on the whole issue. That's the point. In fact, when this judicial standards and accountability bill came up for discussion within the Rajya Sabha, and the law minister was so critical of this judgment. Mr. Parashar, in the council, nominated member of the Rajya Sabha, reminded him, it's also reported in the press, that Mr. Sibal himself was one of the main supporters of this judgment. And Mr. Sibal accepted this. Now, this is not only a case of Mr. Sehwag or Mr. Prashant Bhushan. The author of the majority judgment, Justice J.S. Verma, himself thought, perhaps lived to regret that he had given this judgment. The result was that it was realized as a result of the experience that you cannot leave the matters to judiciary alone. There must be some law in place, some legal mechanism where they would be accountable not only to judges. The judges, as someone said, judges appoint themselves and are accountable to themselves. That is not a situation that is desirable. There has to be a law, and therefore the necessity of introducing of judicial accountability. Now, when this bill was introduced, as we were told earlier, in the Lok Sabha even passed it without any discussion in the deal. But there was some lively discussion when it was introduced in the Rajya Sabha. And interestingly, two eminent counsels on opposite sides of political divide, the Law Minister Kapil Sibal, who introduced the bill, the leader of the opposition, Mr. Arun Jaitley, seem to agree with each other on this aspect of the judiciary being accountable to a body which is outside the judiciary, an independent authority. It's a rare occasion when these two leaders must have agreed. Now, in between, after the second judge's case was decided, the need was felt for the President to make a reference. And that was a presidential reference was made, largely for seeking the Supreme Court opinion on the aspect of the present situation get tarnished. Whether they are honest judges, upright judges, corrupt judges, and then when there is no redress or there is no mechanism in place for removal of such judges or taking effective action against them, the entire judiciary gets tarnished. A few rotten apples can tarnish the reputation of the entire judiciary. Which is why the law, in my submission, would aid in protecting the honest and visiting the required punitive action to be taken against those who are straying from the path of equity, judicial equity. Now these are not two, that's why I began by saying that these, to my mind, are not incompatible things, not mutually exclusive. A judge who is accountable will not cease to be independent. In fact, I came across an interesting observation by a noted American law professor, Mr. David Wendt, and his observations seem to me to be very apt in this situation. And what happens is that his apparent conflict between the independence and the accountability of judiciary is not confined to our country. This is a worldwide phenomenon. The judges always say that, believe that accountability would somehow encroach on their independence. And he says that the primary concern, these are his observations, I quote, primary concern, judge's own sense of independence and his internal sense of accountability. These more subjective concepts, which may be termed judicial courage. Judicial courage for the judge who is willing to be independent, and judicial integrity for the judge who is willing to hold herself accountable, do not conflict with each other, and therefore need to be balanced. The structural protection to insulate judges from the outside influence and accountability to police judicial misconduct. The point he is making is, a person who has the judicial courage to be independent would also have judicial integrity, would not shy away from being accountable to an authority which is not an internal authority. And it is a matter which Mr. Lavande referred to earlier. In appointment, for instance, the appointments are made today. One doesn't know because higher judiciary day in, day out sit in judgment over the decisions of the other authorities, holding them to be arbitrary. If one makes an observation of how judicial appointments are made, there is nothing more arbitrary than in the making of the appointment of judges. How the judges, the members of the bar, are chosen and to make elevated to the High Court. There is no explanation forthcoming. One doesn't know about the background of the judges, their ability, their integrity, their commitment to the constitutional philosophy. After all, they are there to uphold the Constitution of India. Somebody holding narrow sectarian views, to my mind, or adhering to particularly casteist for religious affinity, would be inconsistent. His background would be inconsistent for a person to be elevated to the post of. This is something that is lost sight of. If you have such a background, I would consider the person to be unfit to be appointed as a High Court judge, because he has not imbibed the constitutional philosophy in him, and therefore his pronouncement or judgment are bound to run counter to the spirit of the Constitution or philosophy of the Constitution. This is not only a matter. Yes, I am told that my time is up. I think so I would please wind up by thanking the organizers, giving me the opportunity of sharing my thoughts with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Mulgaonkar. Very interesting session. I myself did not have the will to stop Advocate Mulgaonkar while he was addressing, because he touched upon some very thoughtful moments in judicial pronouncements, which we often tend to forget. I'll not take much time. Perhaps we could summarize a little later once both our speakers are done for the day. I request our second speaker, Advocate Coutinho, to kindly address.
Chairperson, Advocate Agni, Advocate Mulgaonkar, Advocate Lavande, friends. Yesterday when the topic was given to me, I raised the same question to Agni, whether if you have independence, you can't be accountable, because it is versus accountability versus independence. That is how it was. And then I just went to when I went home, I tried to go into the dictionary, and accountability is defined as responsibility for your decision and actions. And if you put this for judicial accountability, it would be judges being answerable for their decisions. Judges being answerable for their decisions. But somehow we have built an aura around independence of judiciary that the moment accountability comes, it is felt that it is at the cost of independence. I teach in the college. There is always a huge one chapter like you have to take for at least 2 sessions on independence of the judiciary. You know, it is all charge and the consolidatory fund of India and their salaries, all those things are taken. But that, on the question of accountability, is never spoken about. I was not there when Lavande spoke about the 2010 bill. Vinny also made mention of it, and Mulgaonkar also made mention of the 2010 bill. That is a judicial accountability. What is that? Standards of accountability. Standards and accountability bill of 2010. To my mind, the bill is there. According to me, as I look at it, the bill was supposed to be amended in 2012. In 2013 now, a new bill has already been introduced, passed in the Rajya Sabha. That is the 2013 Judicial Appointment Commission Act 2013. The judicial standards part has almost been separated from that bill. Of course, that bill has been passed by the Lok Sabha. It has not come before it is before the Rajya Sabha. But the way the second bill has been passed, it looks like the standards bill, the judicial standards bill, that part has been done away with. And it all started with a speech by Chief Justice Kapadia on 15/8/2011, the Independence Day celebration of the Supreme Court Bar Association, where he said, any self-respecting judge would not like the idea of a layman person probing into the allegations against the judge and imposing punishments. This was in 2011. Now after he said this, there was almost a cacophony of the entire higher judiciary, which the policeman has buckled, and thereafter almost took steps to sever the accountability part from the appointment part. And to my mind, the accountability part is not going to come. It's not going to come because they have already passed the appointments bill, and the endeavor now would be to bring the appointments bill for the Lok Sabha. In fact, even now, the numbers are precarious, and I don't see how even the appointments bill, they can get passed before the Lok Sabha. That is point. See, every now and then, this issue comes up whether there could be accountability with independence. Almost all the forward-looking countries have special laws dealing with accountability. Like South Africa has the Judicial Services Amendment Bill passed in 2007. Australia has a Judicial Commission. Canada has the Canadian Judicial Council. USA does not have at an apex level, but USA has Judicial Council Reforms and Judicial Conduct Disability Act at a states level. Now all these commissions are permitting litigants to directly file complaints before these councils or commissions against judges, against decisions. Now it is not that decisions are overruled by these commissions, but reports are made and reports are taken care of by the government, by the state, by the higher judiciary at a later time. Meantime, the decisions given are implemented. Now, I would say we also in our country require an institution of that nature, not to tinker with judicial decisions, but some sort of a judicial lokayukta, some sort of a grievance redressal machinery, some sort of a judicial ombudsman where litigants directly go and give their complaints. And those complaints are looked into by that authority. That authority may give its report to the Chief Justice, and the Chief Justice or whoever to whom the report is given may take action deemed fit. In fact, the 2010 bill was almost in that direction. They had three committees: the Oversight Committee, the Investigation Committee, and the Scrutiny Committee. The Scrutiny Committee could go into the complaints, and if the complaints are frivolous, the punishment that could be imposed was going up to 5 years, and the amount was 5 lakhs. Despite that, of course, I don't see how the 2010 bill could be flawed by anybody, except the only area on which there could be discussion on who could be there on the Oversight Committee or who could be there on the Scrutiny Committee. Only in these two areas there could be a discussion. Whether the Attorney General should be there, whether the Attorney General should not be there, whether the Chief Justice should be there, whether the Chief Justice should not be there. I mean, only on those areas there could be a discussion. But on the question of merit of the bill, I don't see how anybody could flaw the bill. But in any case, the type of discussion that goes around in our country, that the moment we talk of accountability, we think that independence is getting fingered, and on that basis, that bill has died. Now, why the whole question has come about? Like it is not that for some time now this discussion is there. Like if you ask me, I would say two institutions have held our society, have served the society quite well. It is the courts and the Election Commission. So if you had asked me 10 years back, I would have said first the judiciary and then the Election Commission. But if you ask me today, I am saying first the Election Commission and then the judiciary. Now that is because of so much muck that has got stuck to the judiciary. A senior lawyer who was a law minister told the Supreme Court that half the Chief Justices have been corrupt. I mean, he told them. Then you find some of them big name. Like you have Justice Savarwal big name, you have Justice Anand big name. In fact, when I was going yesterday night, I came across a case. It is from Rajasthan. Yes, M.M. Punji, Balakrishnan, all these are Chief Justice who had for a long time. Now, there was interesting, yes. One Dr. Sunita Mahajan complained to the Chief Justice that Justice Arun Madan of the Rajasthan High Court demanded sexual favors to fix a particular case in her favor. Now, G.B. Patnaik was appointed as the judge to probe into that, but meantime the judge resigned. We have seen something like 3 crores deposited in 12 lockers when Reddy's bail was being heard in the Andhra Pradesh Sessions Court. Transparency International gives certain figures. I was going through it yesterday night. But of course, I don't have the latest figures. This is for 2007. They say that 77% of the respondents believe that Indian judiciary is corrupt and that the bribes seem to be solicited as a price for getting things done. I am just putting that. Now, for the 12 months period of 2005, the entire 2005, Transparency International estimates the amount of bribes in India to be $580 million. Now, I don't know how they have come to these figures. These are their figures. by interviewing various litigants throughout the country. They say it is $580 million. According to them, money paid is 61% through lawyers, 29% directly, and only 5% to middlemen. And if that is the position, I don't see, or even if this is not the position, if that is a perception, then it is required that the perception is done away with by having a mechanism in place, which mechanism will deal with every complaint possible. Personally, I would say that in a matter which I lose, I may go in appeal, I may go higher in appeal. That is one part of the judicial ladder to decide the rights of parties. But a losing party or even a winning party must have a right to complain the manner he has won or lost, and or there is some misconduct on the part of the judge. If that complaint is frivolous, maybe a committee like that scrutiny committee will reject that complaint and also impose a fine in case some wrong is attributed to the judges wrongly. The other grievance I have is about this excessive judge-dominated alternate dispute redressal. You know, I somehow feel that executive can promote this. Litigants can promote. Through legislature it can come, no problem. But when the judges make it mandatory, saying that your matter will have to go for mediation, your matter will have to settle through local adalats, it is a complete failure of the judges and the courts in saying that you can't get justice through the courts. A right of a litigant cannot be bartered for something called peace of mind. The final analysis in the alternate dispute redressal is a litigant must have a peace of mind. And to get that peace of mind, in any case, if it is going on for 20 years, you may get peace of mind if you settle your matter. But why should a litigant's right be settled, bartered I would say, for something called a peace of mind? But then, since there is docket revolution in the country, maybe the executive can do it. But the court doing it, Supreme Court doing it, our High Court doing it, at least to my mind, is not correct. I did not want to enter the area of appointments, but Mulgaonkar touched it. And there is a second session tomorrow on the appointments. But I have to make a small list. How the appointment is made, whether it is collegium system, whether it is fully by the executive, whether it is fully by the judges, whether it is by through the commission. Now, whichever the commission, whichever the executive, as long as you are not transparent with whom you are appointing, you will get the same type of people through executive, through collegium, or through the commission, as long as there is no transparency. This year, in May, normally when the judges are appointed, we keep quiet. In any case, he's becoming a judge. Particularly for advocates, he's becoming a judge. We have to argue before that very judge how to oppose such an appointment. But this year, according to me, a good stand has been taken. In Punjab, about 1,000 lawyers protested against all the 7 names proposed by the collegium and cleared by the collegium. This was in May 2013. All the 7 names were dropped. In Madras in June 2013 this year, 15 names had to be dropped after the Madras High Court Bar Association protested. All 15 names dropped. Now that is, now look at these 7 selected, 15 selected, 7 dropped, 15 dropped. This is because nobody knew whom the collegium was choosing. And the Madras High Court Bar Association and the Punjab High Court Bar Association was in a position to convince the High Court that the person chosen firstly do not merit even attention of of the collegium. And in such a situation, even if the entire appointment is given to the commission as per the 2013 bill, approved by the Rajya Sabha, nothing is going to work unless you have some sort of a scrutiny, some sort of a public disclosure on who are the people that are chosen. Maybe the bar associations have to be formally consulted, not informally, not asking one person or two persons, not AG only, may not be the president only. Maybe formal consultation with the bar. What is wrong in having a formal consultation and finding out who the persons are? The next, I will wind up, it is Saturday evening. The next point I would like to make is, see, as far as higher judiciary is concerned, we have only the impeachment process which is not working. And as far as the lower judiciary is concerned, we have the 235, Article 235, which also has not worked. I would say that both for the lower judiciary and the higher judiciary, there must be some authority which shall go into the complaints of the litigants and also impose minor punishments. See, major punishment like impeachment is never going to happen. If that is never going to happen, then we must have a scheme of some minor punishments on the judges. Now, this has led to another situation where the Chief Justices are saying that if minor punishments are imposed, there would be no faith in those judges in whom minor punishment is imposed. Now that is again getting us to a system, the issue of whether because you seek accountability, you feel that independence has been tinkered with, or accountability must come at the cost of independence. See, that can't be. If you are held to be responsible for some misdemeanor, some punishment has to be imposed. Now, what punishment? Maybe the acts and rules have to be made in finalizing what punishment can be imposed for what misdemeanor. Advocate Mulgaonkar has dealt with almost all the issues as far as judicial pronouncements. The last submission I would like to make is we must find a balance between competing principles of independence and accountability. But so far, up to now, according to me, we have given too much stress on independence and no stress on accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Coutinho, for your wonderful thoughts. After hearing both the speakers, I'm sure we are left in a dilemma as to how do we balance accountability with independence. From what we have heard, the basic fear as regards accountability and independence, as I see, arises for two reasons. The judges who are held to be unaccountable or whose integrity comes into question are judges who are appointed by either the present or some former Chief Justices of the Supreme Court or the High Court. The fallacy in this accountability versus independence comes because if we see the scheme of the Act, the oversight committee, the scrutiny committee, or the complaints committee, whatever they have styled it under this particular bill, the investigation committee, all these committees are to be headed by a former Chief Justice of India or a former Chief Justice of the High Court, some other members, some other judges of the Supreme Court or the High Court. Now, independence is a big question mark in this issue, because many a times it may be a judge in question who was appointed by one of this former Chief Justice or the former Chief Justice of India. So whether this scrutiny investigation committee or whatever you call it, will they look at that issue in a completely partisan manner? Will they look at it in a very independent view that this judge is really coming under the scan? The whole issue today is the society itself, the executive itself, and the judiciary are deep-rooted in corruption. So accountability is to be expected from whom? The executive or the judiciary, the two most important features of our democratic setup. And if independently an institution is to probe it, are the executive accountable enough to probe the judiciary? Or is the judiciary accountable enough to probe the executive? Therefore, this entire issue of accountability versus independence. Advocate Coutinho gave two important facets of accountability and independence. Advocate Coutinho just mentioned that in Chennai and in Rajasthan and in Punjab, the advocates went against the collegium and voiced their voice saying that these judges are not accountable enough or not clean enough to be appointed as judges. Advocate Coutinho mentioned that the bribes or misdemeanors in favor of these judges, many a times the corruption, 61% are the lawyers community who contribute to this. So question which immediately came to my mind is, these 1,000 lawyers who voiced their view against this appointment of judges, were they those 61%? Otherwise, how did they know that these judges are not accountable or good enough? So it's also intricate today. The entire civil society is on the fringe of accountability. And as Advocate Coutinho also mentioned, while one act is in the freezer, Mr. Kapil Sibal introduces a new act taking part of one issue regarding appointment of judges. So the question remains, why did Mr. Sibal completely keep aside judicial standards and accountability and introduce only a bill on appointment of judges? We have so many laws, and the way I see it, this is another law which was to be put into effect. Ultimately, I feel accountability and independence can coexist if we go by the fundamental rule which we all should follow and which all judges are supposed to follow. कर्म कर, फल के बारे में मत सोच. Unfortunately, today it's the fruit which is more important. Everybody forgets about what one has to do. So with this few words and in summarizing what our speakers have put forth before you, they have given a very good perspective of accountability versus independence, and I will throw this session open briefly for 10 minutes for any public queries or anything that you would expect from the panelists here on this particular bill. Any questions from the audience? Whatever you are already.
I am a professor, retired. I also practice after retirement. The issue today is accountability of judiciary. Now this question of accountability or independence is put in a very peculiar manner. Accountability to whom is one of the questions. Accountability not to executive, not to parliament, not to anybody, but to people, litigants. I think we are totally ignoring the litigants. A scene in a court today, if you go in any court, particularly lower judiciary, something like this. 10 o'clock, doors are opened, lots of people got in, about 40-50 cases are listed, and if there are 50 cases, there are 100 lawyers and there are 100 litigants. Overcrowding outside. Most of the cases today are given dates. Not even one case is discussed or argued. From 10 o'clock till 12:30, everything is date given. People just go away. Every date given, 2 advocates go away, 4 litigants or 2 litigants go away. Now this scene I think is repeated in High Court also, where you cannot enter also the room. It is also perhaps in Supreme Court. So today courts are overcrowded.
Sir, in Supreme Court, even the lawyers
and overcrowded, and no work is being done, like Parliament. Just as in Parliament they come, they shout and they go away. That is our court today. We are discussing accountability of judiciary without judges here. Now, court does not mean judiciary only. The most important element in the court is litigant. The second important element is advocate, counsel, and the third one is judge. Now, if accountability is to come, it should come from, I think, all 3 sections. You cannot expect accountability from one sector only, and cannot enforce it also. It must come from all 3 directions. Therefore, when we talk of accountability, now this accountability has come up recent problem, or it has become a problem in almost every field in our country. And we want therefore ombudsman everywhere. And that is what we are searching for court also today. And therefore we have to find out, to my view, just court is an instrument of justice. Input is court, output is justice. Now this input should be qualitatively and quantitatively good, and output also should be good. If the inputs are bad, output will be bad. Now that is what input-output relationship is. Now most of these problems have come about because we don't have quality in choice of court. We don't have training proper. We don't have quantity. And over and above that, there is an element which is not interested in speeding up justice. That is advocate. I find that today advocates is one of the biggest obstacles in justice. If justice is delayed today in India, and if justice is made costly, I would put 70% of the blame on advocates.
Perhaps sir, we'll have advocates accountability.
Now, I am talking in front of advocates, I am myself practicing, but during last 5-10 years that I have seen, in the court scene, I find that advocates are mostly responsible for most of the problems in judiciary. At least 60-70% problems have come up because of that. Taking adjustment, repeated adjustment, unlimited, coming very late and keeping other people waiting, doing all types of tricks in order to get delay. Now these are things which shows that there is an element which is not working properly. It's an important element. We must self-examine ourselves. If we want accountability from others, we must also be accountable. Now I am not saying that only improving advocates will improve the thing. judge and the advocate and the litigant.
Right, sir. The point is noted.
Now, unless before liberation, as far as I know, advocates were always telling the client, if they come, that you don't have a case, don't file it. Today there is no advocate who advises like that, as far as I know. The moment somebody comes, he says, yes, I will take it, he will succeed.
So
No,
your question is, are lawyers accountable?
Now, therefore, accountability or independence or all that thing has come about because the entire social fabric has become unaccountable.
Right, sir. Perhaps that
No,
we are touching upon in
later on.
professionality.
But what I want to say is accountability is not an isolated issue.
So the question to us, sir, is, are lawyers to be held accountable insofar as judicial accountability also is?
Courts or judges should be accountable to litigants.
Right, we get the question.
Yeah. And something must be done, as Mr. Coutinho said, to see that litigants get justice and PD and chief.
Right.
That will be accountability.
Perhaps Mr. Coutinho can answer.
I don't fully agree with him, but
I think today we are dealing with judicial accountability.
Trend
So
is,
the advocate accountability could be a separate discussion at some other time. Today we are dealing
the
that question.
trend is, if we want good and quick justice, we require some
All types of
I think, yeah,
accountability.
see, that could be a separate topic for discussion at some other time.
And we will have Mr. Buckley one as one of the speakers.
general remark. I
said money can move mountains. What I feel is it is the self-conscious, as Sir Murgaonkar said, and it's the sense of integrity that is required in every individual. So also the judges who decide the cases. Now my question would be, it's not a question, just a thought when Sir Murgaonkar said that as a matter of punishment, when a judge from Bombay High Court is transferred to Sikkim, it would be kind of punishment. But is there any kind of provision in the judicial accountability bill which is to be introduced or which is to be passed, that will there be any deterrent effect on the future judges or the other judges when punishment is given to one judge? Will there be a deterrent effect on others that they will prohibit themselves or refrain themselves from doing such kind of act henceforth? Will there be that kind of act? Is there any provision? In fact, I have not gone through whole. I just glance on it.
Deterrent effect insofar as that judge is concerned or other judges?
For the other judges, because one judge is punished for doing some kind of act, or it is proved, then it should have an effect on the others. Only then the other person will refrain. Because if I feel there is nothing much harsh on it, then it may be so. A person who is not having self-conscious may definitely go for it.
Whatever may be the type of punishment has to be there. That is what our intellect advocate Coutinho is saying.
Yes.
Now, deterrence is a self-imbibed value. We have the Indian Penal Code where so many rapists, so many murderers are punished. Why are there rapes and crimes, murders still happening? So, that's what I said.
The whole question of punishment was sought to be taken care of in the 2000 bill, where they had certain minor punishments. But particularly the upper judiciary is opposed to any sort of a minor punishment. In the sense, they feel that if you keep a judge with a punishment, it would tar the image of the entire judiciary. And that is why there should not be an element of minor punishment. They in fact talk of something called an internal mechanism. And the internal mechanism only is withdrawing work from him. That appears to be what they talk of.
It's been an interactive session and many of us have got an insight to begin with, and the sessions continue tomorrow. There are very interesting topics tomorrow. One is dealing with the problems and the perspective of the act itself. What are the flaws in this particular bill? which itself is going to be an interesting topic. And again we have another interesting topic, which is the role of media in this particular act. Because if you go back and have a look at the act contains 3 clauses which deal with how to approach the media or to what extent the media facility can be availed if there is a probe under this particular act. So that will be a very interesting topic. And once again we have another topic of accountability coming again tomorrow from 2 very senior lawyers. So I hope this has been a fruitful session to you all, and we will definitely pass on the word that there are more interesting sessions to come tomorrow, and we'll have a bigger gathering and an even better interactive session. So it's been a pleasure to moderate this session with 2 very senior lawyers who have taken back down the memory lane many judicial pronouncements and their interpretations of the act. As a moderator of the session and on behalf of the audience, I will extend my thanks to Advocate Gurgaonkar and Advocate Carino for being part of this session. And thank you one and all for bearing with us for over an hour. It's been a pleasure to chair this session.